excited to be able to host Dr. Huebner today. I use this book for 20 years with every kid who's in the appropriate age range of 12 and under. I will say that if your child's a reader, it's really great because they can do it on their own, but kids who are not readers have really enjoyed doing it with their parents, kind of a chapter at a time. So let me introduce Dr. Huebner. Dr. Huebner is a psychologist, parent coach, and author of numerous self-help books for children, including the bestsellers What to Do When You Worry Too Much and Outsmarting Worry. Specializing in child anxiety, Dr. Huebner's work is known around the world, with her books translated into 23 languages. She's been featured on the Today Show, WebMD, Parents Magazine, and a host of other news and information outlets. The parent of a once anxious child, Dr. Huebner faced anxiety in her own life, making the same mistakes most parents make before finding the keys to breaking herself and her child free. She now teaches those keys to others, sharing with parents, therapists, school counselors, and educators the skills they need to help anxious children live happier lives. Her TED Talk, Rethinking Anxiety, has been viewed over 1 million times. So welcome, Dr. Huebner.
Thank you.
As we said, we got some questions ahead of time and we'll be looking at those, but feel free to enter new questions in the question and answer. We will answer as many questions as we are able, but we want to be clear that we will be focusing all our questions about things relevant to the book, children 12 and under, so we'll not be responding to questions for teens and young adults. And we will focus on questions about anxiety rather than any other diagnosis. We'll go ahead. Like I said, I've been using your book for many, many years. Can you tell us a little bit about What to Do When You Worry Too Much, the original book, and what do you think made it a hit or so popular?
Yeah, so the first one came out 20 years ago. As you said, it was the first book that I wrote. I wrote it initially as a take-home kind of resource for my own clients. I felt like they needed something that could help them practice the kinds of skills that they were learning, strategies that they were learning at home. So I typed it, back in the day of typewriters, and I hand illustrated and went down to Kinko's and Xeroxed a bunch of copies, and I was using it with my clients. And it seemed like it was really helpful for them. So I decided to put it together into an actual book, and I submitted it to APA, Imagination Press, and sort of went from there. I think that it really hit big for a couple reasons. One was that at the time, it was really the first of its kind in that it was a book that spoke directly to the anxious child in language that they could easily relate to. It normalized what they were feeling and going through. And importantly, it taught really specific skills. And it was interactive. So there are places in both editions of the book, there are places for children to draw and write so they can kind of personalize or customize what it is that they're learning, and it really internalized the strategies that they're learning. So yeah, kind of right book at the right time, and it did well, which was great.
So now that you've already had a bestseller for 20 years, what made you decide to do the second edition?
So it was feeling like it had gotten a little dated. There were things within the book that no longer really reflected best practice, and I wanted to update it so that it was more in line with current thinking about anxiety. I'm going to give a quick example of that. So in the original book, children are encouraged to externalize their anxiety, to think of it as like a little bully or creature, and to talk back to it. That's still a really important strategy. But in the first edition of the book, I was essentially encouraging kids to yell at their anxiety, to tell their little worry creature, go away. And kids would come back and they would say, I did that. I tried to tell my worry to go away and nothing changed. I didn't feel any better. And I thought, of course, it's not as if you can say to your little worry creature, imaginary worry creature, go away, and it actually does go away. So in the new edition, children are still taught to externalize anxiety, to think of their worry as a little creature, but instead of seeing it as a bully and instead of yelling at it, I want kids to either see it as essentially overzealous, it's trying hard to protect you, but making lots of mistakes, or as kind of a trickster. And so instead of saying go away, kids can be taught to say no, thank you, or I'm not listening to you, that sort of thing. And so there were various modifications like that that I really wanted to get into a new edition of the book so that it could be even more useful for today's children.
Great, great. Um, does the new edition provide guidance for parents as well, especially if they have their own anxiety that makes it hard for them to tolerate their children's worries?
Yeah. So the book is clearly written to children, but it's meant to be read by a child and parent together. And actually, even children who are capable of reading on their own, so, kids from maybe third grade up would be capable of reading on their own, they're going to get more out of the book if they read it with a parent.
Mhm.
And so there are lots of places within the book where there is kind of advice given to parents. It's still talking to children, but the book does give guidance about how parents can respond to things like requests for reassurance or avoidance behaviors, things of that sort. So yes, there's lots of advice to parents embedded in the book. In terms of a parent getting triggered by their child's anxiety, that's really common. So, anxious children often have anxious parents. And even if a parent is not themselves anxious by nature, we are hardwired to respond to our children's distress. So when a child is in an anxious moment, that triggers something in us, in our brains. And we have kind of a danger alarm go off in our own brain and are trying as hard as we can to just quiet the anxiety, our own and our child's, as quickly as possible. And that often leads to doing things that turn out to be counterproductive, like accommodating the anxiety, fostering or allowing avoidance, trying to fix or take care of the situation, providing too much reassurance, right? So parents and children both need to learn how to quiet their brain alarm, how to kind of stop that brain alarm so that they can then use the strategies that are taught in the book. And there are really clear recommendations about quieting your brain alarm that both parents and children can use.
Right. And I think parents often feel they have to have the answer and do it right away. And taking a pause and a break to collect yourself can make a huge difference in being able to support your child.
Absolutely. So, when a child is in a really anxious moment, the thinking part of their brain, their prefrontal cortex, essentially shuts down. And so that's not a time to try to reason with your child or explain or issue threats or offer bribes or, it's just not a time to be speaking to their prefrontal cortex, speaking to their thinking brain. So you've got to quiet down the alarm, your own and your child's, before you move into any attempt to address what the anxiety is actually about. And I think parents can say to their children, something like, whatever it is that they're anxious about or seeking an answer to, we'll talk about that when you're using your regular voice. And I really like that prompt about regular voice more than parents saying calm down. So when parents say calm down, kids often get angry or take offense. But if you say, we'll talk about that when you're using your regular voice, let's take some breaths so we can get back to your thinking brain, that helps children kind of regulate or begin to regulate and calm down. And that's just really important to do.
Great. You just mentioned accommodation, and what really does that mean?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So accommodations are things that adults do, parents do, to try to get rid of the anxiety. So if a child is anxious about separating, an accommodation might be staying with your child or not requiring them to go do something on their own. If a
Mhm,
child is anxious about germs, an accommodation might be um, it, allowing them to wash their hands whenever they want, or allowing them to have completely separate utensils from the rest of the family. It's kind of obeying what anxiety is demanding,
mhm,
so because you're trying to reduce anxiety.
mhm.
And virtually all parents of anxious children accommodate.
Right. Mhm,
And so it comes from a place of love and good intentions, and it makes things a whole lot worse. It's not the right thing to do. And so one of the things that parents really need to learn, parents of anxious children, is how to be helpful to their child, how to be empathic and supportive of their child without accommodating the anxiety.
right. I also explained to parents, unfortunately, you're following anxiety's rules too, and it might make your child feel that those changes are necessary, right?
Right,
You're sharing that the anxiety is dangerous. So
right.
we have to follow its rules, and we need you to step outside of the anxiety so you can best support your child.
Right,
Mm,
right. And we want both parents and children to understand that anxiety is uncomfortable. Undoubtedly, it's uncomfortable. It is not dangerous, right? So just because you're afraid doesn't mean you're actually in danger. There's nothing dangerous about feeling anxious. It is uncomfortable. It doesn't mean anything beyond it being uncomfortable. And so you don't have to be frantic about making the anxiety go away, right? And oftentimes, kids who struggle with anxiety worry so much about the possibility of getting anxious that they avoid or start doing things that are called safety behaviors, like, doing kind of special things to try to appease their worry or obey their worry. And it's kind of a preemptive way of trying to not have to get into an anxious situation, but that also makes things a whole lot worse.
mm, yeah. What age is too young to start worrying about anxiety in my child?
Okay. Um, so children of really any age can struggle with anxiety. Anxiety can be, so we sometimes see anxiety in preschool age children, very young children who have trouble separating beyond kind of what's considered normal separation anxiety, who are really avoidant, who are really particular about things needing to be a certain way. I guess I would want to reframe the question a little bit, and it's not that there's a certain age at which you should start to worry about your child's anxiety, but instead, at any age when you see anxiety, there are things you can begin to do, right? And the sooner you start to do those things, the better, right? So we want to help our children learn to be brave. And that's something that you start from the time that they're tiny. And we want children to learn how to walk towards the safe things that they're afraid of rather than shrinking away from them. And again, that's something that you begin in any age because we want children to learn that they can tolerate feeling uncertain, feeling nervous, feeling anxious. We want kids to see that they can tolerate those feelings. And so we want to start at a really young age teaching those lessons. And
And
that's not
parents
to
are
say
so
that if you haven't started young, you're doomed, right?
right,
At
right.
any age, you can
Mhm,
begin to do these things.
right. And parents are so powerful and can be so helpful, in these situations.
Absolutely.
One question is, do you recommend doing an activity like a repetitive task to help with anxiety, like making a snack?
So I would see that sort of thing as a distraction, right? And distraction can be helpful, but you want to be sure that you're not just trying to bump your child out of what they're feeling in a way that fosters avoidance, right?
Mm,
So Certainly, you can have your child either make or eat a snack, you can have them color or draw, you can have them play with their pet for a little while. You can do those kinds of distractions, but then you need to go back to whatever it was that they were feeling anxious about. So you can do those kinds of things to help to, kind of bring down the brain alarm, bring down the temperature, but then you want your child to still move into the situation. It's not just, I'm going to distract you by entertaining you in some way out of this, and then we're going to try to forget about it. It's not that.
Okay. So it's September. Can you talk a little bit about school avoidance?
Yes, it's October,
Sorry,
and
it's October.
that's right, and there's still school avoidance. So yeah, school avoidance is unfortunately pretty common, and it can be the anxiety that is often a part of school avoidance can be related to a number of different things, right? So it can be just straight up separation anxiety, kids being nervous about being apart from their parents, and they need to be apart for long stretches of time at school. It can be related to a fear of making mistakes, a fear of having your teacher displeased with you. There are lots of kids with emetophobia, fear of vomiting, getting sick, who develop school avoidance as well. It's obviously really important to get on top of school avoidance as efficiently as you can. And that typically requires a team of people. So parent, child, teacher, and school counselor, if there is a school counselor. And kids who have been not going to school at all for a stretch of time often need a step-by-step plan so that they're gradually resuming attendance a little bit at a time, but in a very deliberate, sequential kind of way.
Great, great. How do parents involve siblings to help the anxious child cope?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Mhm.
So there are times that, especially for anxious kids that are a little bit older, they begin to feel private about their anxiety and they don't want anyone to know, including siblings. They feel embarrassed. And so parents and children sort of collude to try to keep it secret. That is usually not very helpful because the siblings notice that there's something going on and don't know how to understand it, don't know what to make of it. So I think it's best to be straightforward about the anxiety, to not kind of collude with keeping it secret or private, because when you're doing that, you're essentially agreeing with your child that, yes, this is something to be ashamed of. And we don't want to do that. We want to normalize anxiety. Siblings can definitely be brought in to help with exposure. So, one of the main techniques, strategies to use with anxiety is called exposure. It's essentially intentionally doing the things that you're afraid of or moving towards the things you're afraid of a little bit at a time, right? And it can be done in kind of playful ways. And siblings are often a part of that in a way that's really helpful to a child. You do want to make sure that siblings don't use the anxiety as ammunition. So, I would hope that parents are have kind of a blanket policy in the family that we treat each other with kindness, that we don't use one another's sensitivities or weaknesses as weapons against each other. And definitely they need to do that with not allowing taunting or goading or provoking related to the anxiety.
Great. Two things I see in my practice is some siblings feel overly responsible for
Mm.
having to always help, and that's a stress on them. And
Mhm.
then other siblings can get kind of controlling, right?
Right.
And then the anxious kid resents, their sibling kind of telling them to use their strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the anxiety is going to magnify dynamics that might already exist within a family, right? So whether it's one sibling and thinks of themselves as kind of the alpha and is trying to control, or one of them has kind of a parenting bent. There are times that siblings get angry at and resent the anxious child because they often consume a lot of parental time and attention. Anxiety can hold entire families hostage. So there are plenty of times that if a child is really seriously anxious, it keeps the whole family from being able to do things and live life in a normal way. So there can be resentment. And yeah, it's important for parents to be addressing and, paying attention to and spending time with the non-anxious siblings and coming up with kind of ways to be addressing this as a family that make clear that it's up to the anxious child and the parent to really kind of take the lead in terms of managing the anxiety.
Great. Two things related to some school counselors that I think are on with us. One is I recommend your book to families a lot. I'm a school counselor. Do you have recommendations about how I can use it at school? And the second question was, do you train schools in these approaches?
Yeah. So really all of my books, I have 20 books at this point, and all of them are pretty school friendly because they're written in short chapters. And I hear often from counselors who go chapter by chapter with either small groups, if they have an anxiety group, or with individual children. And they're just reading the book together and talking about how to implement the strategies at school. And so I think that these books lend themselves really well to that. I have another series called Mini Books About Mighty Fears. And two of those books are very appropriate for school. One is about fear of trying new things, and one is fear of making mistakes. So yeah, I think all of these books lend themselves nicely for use by school counselors. And they provide language that is helpful for school counselors and teachers and parents to be using with children. In terms of training schools, yes, I often give talks, continuing education kinds of talks to educators. And if a school counselor is interested in having me come do that, they can reach out to me just through my website. I also sometimes am sponsored by parent-teacher associations to come and do Q&As with parents at schools.
Great, thanks. Um, One question is, do you recommend worry shrinking strategies? I'm not exactly sure what that means. But do we have to do them in a particular order?
Okay. So I would say yes, sort of. I recommend worry shrinking strategies, but one of the things that I tried to clarify in the second edition of the book is that the goal is actually to not make the worry go away. The goal is to change your relationship with the worry. And so I think anything that a child is doing, or child and parent, child and school is doing to try to get rid of the anxiety is likely inadvertently accommodating the anxiety. So instead, I think we need to teach kids to tolerate their anxiety, to move into situations even though they're continuing to feel anxious. And it turns out that that is the most effective way to ultimately reduce the anxiety. So you're tolerating being anxious in the moment in a way that reduces the anxiety in the long run, right? Um, what was the second part of the question? First part was
Just was there an order
in
to
order to do them
approaches?
in. Yeah. So the order is first do things to quiet the brain alarm. And that's, breathing, mindfulness, activity, intentional distraction, those kinds of things. So do things to quiet the brain alarm. And then depending on what the anxiety is about, you might move into a cognitive strategy like helping a child use logic and talk back to their worry, or you might come up with some kind of exposure for a child to do that's moving them towards the thing that they're worried about a little bit at a time. And you want to really be working to not think in black and white kinds of ways, that the child either does the thing you want them to do or doesn't do it at all, right? And instead, you want to be recognizing there's this whole gray area, right? So a child who's washing their hands all the time, it might not be realistic to say no more hand washing, but you can move from frequent, long, soapy hand washes to maybe saying no soap or less time washing. And, you're kind of making it less and less and less, right?
I don't know if it's your recommendation, but often kids don't recognize they're in worry. They think it this time, it's a real risk. So in some ways, being able to kind of label like this is a worry zone,
Yeah,
or
absolutely. And kids often will argue with that. It's not my worry, right? And they argue for two reasons. One is that it doesn't necessarily feel like worry to them. It feels instead like I just don't like that thing, or I just don't want to do it, or they don't necessarily recognize the feeling as anxiety. And also, once parents start working with kids on anxiety, kids understand that once something is identified as a worry, they're going to need to do something. They're going to need to manage it or move into the situation. And so they argue about whether or not it's a worry. It's not productive to get into an argument about whether or not something's a worry, but it is important for parents to really develop an understanding of what the basic strategies are and to help their child use those strategies. Um, I often use an analogy of a smoke detector when talking about the brain alarm, and that's actually in this second edition of the book. So I want kids to understand that their brain alarm, the part of their brain that's tasked with being on the lookout for possible danger and keeping them safe, it functions kind of like a smoke detector. So it's going to warn them in the event of possible danger, in the same way that a smoke detector warns us about possible fire, right? But possible fire is different from real fire, and possible danger is different from real danger, right? So we know that a smoke detector goes off if there are candles burning next to the smoke detector, or if there's toast that's gotten stuck in a toaster. Those are not critical emergencies in the same way that a fire is, right? And in the same way, our brain alarm makes mistakes. It goes off when something might be problematic, dangerous in some way, but isn't necessarily. And we need to learn to not do the equivalent of going running out of the house every time we have a brain alarm, right? So we can talk to kids about the concept of false alarms, and it feels like the real thing every time. And we definitely want to acknowledge that with kids, because it's, whether you're a child or an adult, it's really hard to know when you're anxious about, am I really in danger, or is this one of those false alarm times? You can't tell by the way that you feel, right? And we want parents to stay really grounded in the knowledge of that to the child, they feel like they're really in danger. And just saying to them, you're not in danger, that doesn't change anything, right?
Right. This is a question I hear a lot, and came from one of the attendees. How can I get to the root cause of anxiety for my, not say 9-year-old in this case?
Yeah, I hear that question a lot as well. My answer's maybe a little untraditional, and it's that you don't need to. Um,
That's my same answer too.
okay. Um, and so there are a couple parts to that. One is that there often isn't a root cause. And another is that even when there is a root cause, knowing it doesn't necessarily help you. So I think people who wonder about what's the root cause are coming from the assumption that if I know the root cause, I can kind of explain it to my child or reassure my child, and that'll clear everything up. But it doesn't, right? So an example of that might be a child once had the experience of getting stuck in a public bathroom, like not being able to work the lock and unlock the door. And now they're terrified of going into bathrooms alone or being in small spaces alone because they might get locked in, right? And even if a parent knows that the child had that experience and talks to their child about it and reassures them that it's not going to happen again, or that there are things they can do if it does happen. If a child has already gotten into avoidance and doing safety behaviors to try to protect themselves, just explaining isn't going to change anything. You still need to do an exposure technique where you're having your child be in the situation that they've been avoiding so that they can learn at a brain level, at a deep brain level, that this is a false alarm. Right. So it's not necessary, or it doesn't really get you much to get to the root cause of anxiety.
Right. Um, Uh, this children with anxiety often have sleep issues. Does this book, help with kids who are having trouble sleeping?
Yeah, it should. I have another book that is specific to sleep problems called What to Do When You Dread Your Bed. But, if sleep problems are part of the package, this should be helpful because it's kind of walking parents and children through the various steps, calming the brain alarm, identifying that this is worry, talking back to worry, not letting worry be the boss of the situation by doing the opposite of what worry says, which is essentially what exposure is. So, yeah, you can apply these steps regardless of when in the day or what the worry is about.
Great. How do you help a child who has persistent bad thoughts?
Yeah. So let's maybe define bad thoughts for
Mm.
people who don't necessarily know what that would mean. And it's bad kind of in quotes.
Right, exactly.
So one of the things that sometimes happens with anxiety is that children get intrusive thoughts, and intrusive meaning the thoughts are unwanted and troubling or upsetting in some way. We often see that with obsessive compulsive disorder, that children have intrusive thoughts. And usually when children are having trouble with intrusive thoughts, the child tries to avoid thinking those thoughts, which isn't really possible, or tries to undo them in some way. And parents get in a loop of reassuring, providing lots and lots of reassurance. Neither of those is helpful. So when a child is having persistent intrusive thoughts, exposure needs to be done, which is essentially a way of eventually neutralizing the thoughts by teaching the child that the thought itself, while unpleasant, is not dangerous. And so we want our children to think those bad, in quotes, thoughts on purpose. And there are various playful ways you can do this. You can have the child make up a rap song. You can do poems. You can have them do like make a big poster with the words or phrases that are upsetting to them, but you're having them intentionally dive into the thought or think the thought on purpose to kind of neutralize those thoughts. And it's a really effective technique.
Great. This is a little complicated question, so I'll try. What approaches and techniques can be used for children to reduce anxiety who are seeing differently modeled conflicting behavior when they are at school, daycare, or in another environment outside the house? And would this differ in certain family dynamics, such as an only child kind of structure? So
Yeah.
that's complicated one.
Yeah, that's okay. So it's tough when parents are trying to work with their child to manage anxiety in a particular way, and then they have trouble getting the other adults in their child's life on board, right? So we definitely want, as a first course of action, for the parent to be doing whatever they can to recruit the other parent, if there is a second parent, if grandparents are involved in the child's care, the grandparents, the care providers, the teachers, for parents to be really working to kind of educate the other caring adults in their child's life so that everyone is using the same kind of language and coaching the child in the same way. If that's impossible, then it's going to make things more difficult. But a parent who is trying to use these strategies and is maybe doing it on their own can still be encouraging bravery, not fostering avoidance, not accommodating the anxiety at home. And if a child says, well, my teacher doesn't make me do that, or my other parent doesn't make me do that, a parent can say, well, in our house, this is the way we're doing things. But it definitely makes things more complicated.
Right. Yeah. Um, you addressed this a little bit already, but it's easy for children and parents to fall into the patterns of avoidance and the excessive reassurance because it might quiet the anxiety in the moment, but makes it worse, as you're saying, in the long run. What would you say to a parent who wants to do things differently?
Okay. Yeah. So, as we said before, accommodation and providing excessive reassurance is really common. It comes from a well-intentioned place and it's ineffective. So, in terms of beginning to do things differently, one of the things that a parent can do is set limits on, let's just talk about reassurance, right? So, set limits on the amount of reassurance they're going to provide. The new edition of the book teaches parents and children a game, essentially, to help the child remember and practice not feeding, in quotes, their worry as often as they've been feeding it. So reassurance is a major way of feeding anxiety. It quiets it in the moment, but makes it bigger and more robust in the long run. And the way the game works is essentially kids get a certain number of kind of question cards or question tickets a day. And when they ask a worry question, a reassurance seeking question, a parent can say something like, that would be a card, that would be a ticket if I answer that question. And a child has to make a decision about, is this worth it to me to still ask the question and give up one of my cards? Or not, because a child then gets rewarded for the cards that they save in a given day. And the game is more fully described within the book, but it's an example of how parents can learn to move away from providing reassurance every time their child calls for reassurance and still be doing something that's helpful for the child. Parents can certainly say things to their child like, I can't do that, or I can't answer that because that would be feeding your worry, and I'm not going to feed your worry, right? And parents need to understand that a child is likely to respond angrily to something like that, and that's okay, right? So we want parents to stay as calm as they can, as empathic and connected as they can. So this isn't something that you're yelling at your child about. You're not issuing threats to your child, not giving consequences, not punishing your child. But you as a parent want to stay really grounded in, I'm not going to let worry be the boss of this, or, I know your worry's telling you that you've got to have the answer to this. And if I answer, it's just going to feed worry, and I'm not going to feed worry, right? And I will instead help you use one of your skills. And so we really want parents to do that, even though there's initial distress on the part of the child.
Yeah, I think it's really important to know that it actually will increase anxiety at
Right,
first to
right,
not do what the anxiety says. And it can
right,
look really tough the
right.
first times or two, but it gets easier and easier. And parents can also anticipate because they know their child. What is
Hmm.
their likely response?
Right,
You don't love me, right? A
right,
tantrum,
right,
there, and it's good to think a little bit about that, like,
right.
ahead of time.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful for parents to remember that when the brain alarm goes off, it sets off the fight or flight response. Fight, flight, or freeze response is actually the name of it. And so we know flight, right? Flight is avoidance and, crying and things of that sort. But fight is equally relevant and common, right? And that's when kids get mad in an anxious moment, right? And they might get aggressive, or they might start saying or doing things that are clearly angry. It's still part of an anxiety response, right? And so parents need to be prepared for that, need to be not intimidated by it, or not respond punitively to it, set, just clear, calm limits around it, but not use it as a reason to change what they're doing, right? And it's really important for parents to work at being empathic. I know this is hard, or I know this is different from what I usually do, and this is going to be helpful eventually. And one of the important things is a child needs to have the experience of seeing that they can feel desperate about needing reassurance or needing some kind of accommodation and not getting it. And in the end, nothing bad happens, right? And that's part of what helps a child to see at a deep brain level that these are false alarms, right? That they feel really afraid, but they weren't actually in danger. And the only way that a child learns that at the level they need to learn it is if if a parent is not accommodating, not reassuring, not accommodating the anxiety.
Yeah. And kids love the feeling I can do it.
Right,
They're so happy to see that they can do things that they're afraid they can't do, or
right,
they can handle their anxiety when they
right,
feel like they can't.
right, right.
Um,
Not right in the moment,
no,
but afterwards.
after.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. We've talked about siblings a bit already. One attendee wondered if siblings need separate, specific treatment themselves. Is that what you find?
I think it's going to vary. Yeah, I don't think there's an overall answer to that. If it seems like a sibling is really struggling, and you're seeing things like persistent negative mood or trouble doing things that they used to be able to do, then yeah, you might seek out treatment. But I take a pretty practical approach to therapy. I'm definitely a proponent of cognitive behavioral, skill focused kinds of therapies, and not so much the kind of therapy like we're just trying to provide a supportive adult to be talking to a child. So yeah, if there's a sign that the sibling really needs and would benefit from learning some skills themselves, absolutely. But I don't think siblings routinely need to be in therapy.
There's a simple thing that parents can do is to check with the sibling. What's it like for you when you
Mhm.
see your sibling anxious? Like,
Right.
how do you feel? Because kids will say, that it's fine, or that really worries me. Or
Yeah, and I think
he gets
also
all the attention, right?
right. And parents can also be talking to the sibling about what they can do, right?
Mhm.
If there are things that are helpful that for them to do, great. If the best thing for them to do is go to their room for a little while and read or listen to some music, great. But you can talk in advance about what would be a helpful thing for the sibling to do when their brother or sister is really having trouble with anxiety.
Right. This is another question that I hear a lot from parents. If reassurance is bad for anxiety, how can one show that they are acknowledging their child's emotion? Doesn't it feel like you're dismissing their emotion?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Great
We
question.
never want to be dismissive of what a
Mhm.
child is feeling. So there's someone at Yale University named Ellie Leibovitz, Dr. Ellie Leibovitz, who's created something called the SPACE program. SPACE is an acronym, Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions. And it's a way of treating childhood anxiety by training parents to not accommodate the anxiety. And Dr. Leibovitz talks about something that he calls support. He wants anxious parents to support their anxious children. And support has two components to it. One is acknowledgement, and the second is encouragement. And you have to do both of them. So the acknowledgement piece of it is saying something like, I can see that worry is really bothering you, or I know this feels really scary. And you want to not just give lip service to that, you want to try to say that in really a warm and genuine way, right? And you add the encouragement piece, and you're learning these steps, and this is the step you're on, or this is what I know you can do, right? So you're doing the acknowledgement and the encouragement, right? And it's absolutely important for parents to say to their children something like, I can see how hard this is, or I know this is scary. We don't ever want to say to children things like there's nothing to be afraid of, or there's no reason to worry. Those kinds of statements are dismissive of anxiety, and we don't want to say that.
Right, right. What kind of physical symptoms do you see often going along with child anxiety?
So the most common is stomach aches. But some kids they feel shaky, some kids feel faint, some kids get headaches, some people get just, sort of aches and pains in other parts of their bodies. But by far, most common is stomach aches. And um, kids feel a stomach ache and then often are avoidant. I can't go to school, I can't go to this party, I can't go to soccer practice because my stomach hurts, right? And it's important for parents to first know that the discomfort is real, like your child isn't just faking it and saying they have a stomach ache when they don't. So they really are feeling a stomach ache, and that avoidance is not the right strategy, right? So they still need to help their child move into the situation. And so it's helpful to say something like, I know your stomach hurts. Your stomach often hurts before you do something new. That's worry kind of kicking around in your body. And here's what we're going to do. And you kind of lay out the plan for moving forward anyway. Yeah. And
For,
it can be helpful. I'm sorry, it can be helpful for kids also, kids who are, maybe age 7 and up, to know something about why their body feels uncomfortable, right? So
Mhm.
when your brain alarm goes off, your worry alarm goes off, it changes chemicals within your body because your brain and your body are getting you ready to protect yourself in case the danger is real, right? And so your heart starts beating faster and your digestion slows down. And that's why your body feels weird and uncomfortable when you get anxious. So it can be really helpful for kids to understand something about where that's coming from and the kinds of things that they can do to kind of quiet those physical reactions down.
Great. We're getting close to the end of our questions. I don't know if you want to go here, but one question was asking about OCD in kids. Would you
Yeah,
be open to a
yeah.
question? They actually asked, what new info about kids in OCD would you add to your 2007 book? So it's a big question.
So What to Do When You Worry Too Much, the second edition is it doesn't talk about OCD directly, but it definitely teaches exposure, which is the main strategy that's used with OCD. And so I've already incorporated the things that I wanted to incorporate, and that is a more direct instruction about exposure, right? I have another book that's specific to OCD, What to Do When Your Brain Gets Stuck. I'm in the midst of updating that. So I had a 6-book What to Do series. All 6 of those books are being updated, and they'll come out over the next few years. And then I have another book, another book, Outsmarting Worry, that doesn't talk specifically about OCD, but is definitely an exposure based book, and it's helpful for kids with OCD.
Yeah. And one thing you're already doing that is happening in the OCD world as well is changing, uh, talking about the relationship to the
Right,
OCD or worry,
right,
and responding differently to
right,
the presence of
right.
the obsession. Yeah. Okay. I think, as I said, we're close to the end of the questions we've had come in. Is there anything you would like to finish up and say? You've covered a lot.
Yeah, I always like to end on an optimistic note. So one of the things I love about working with anxious children and their parents is that they often come in with their lives really at a standstill. Anxiety has just completely taken over and is holding everyone hostage. And there are very real, very effective things that can be done, right? And parents, as you said, have a lot of influence and thus the ability to help their child really turn things around, clearly with guidance, right? So things like a self-help book like this, or therapy, can be really helpful in teaching parents and children skills that will be absolutely transformative. And so anxiety is treatable. Even really kind of stuck seeming anxiety can be changed in powerful ways with using the right strategies.
Right. Lastly, there's just a lot of thank yous coming in and people who've used your book and found it so helpful. I think people are asking a little bit maybe how they could reach you or follow up, contact you.
Yeah, so the best way is through my website, which is dawnhuebnerphd.com. If you put my name into a search engine, it should be the first thing that comes up. And there's a contact page at the bottom of that. I'm no longer treating children directly, but I'm doing parent coaching only with the parents of anxious children, so only around anxiety. And as I said, I do a fair amount of public speaking. People can contact me if they're interested in that. So my website is the best place. I'm not really on social media very much.
let's remind the name of the book. People are asking just like, what
Yeah.
again, what is the name of the book?
What to Do When You Worry Too Much, A Kid's Guide to Overcoming Anxiety. And if you get it from someplace like Amazon, you want to make sure that you're looking for the second edition. So this is the newer edition of this book.